Squatting Slav TV.
During the course of the past 6 months, tensions between the US and Iran have been mounting rapidly, prompting speculations of a full-blown conflict in the near future. Whilst the relationship between the US and Iran has been a shaky one for the past several decades, it wasn't until last summer that the pot really started to boil. As you may recall, the US accused Iran of blowing up a Japanese-owned tanker ship in June with virtually no evidence, and then blamed Iran for using drones to bomb oil fields in Saudi Arabia just last fall. In the last 7 days alone, the conflict has escalated to a new level, following several major events that I'll go through briefly before we get into the rest of the video. On December 27th, US officials blamed Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants for the death of an American contractor in Iraq, who was allegedly killed in a rocket strike that left several others wounded at an Iraqi military base. Following the incident, the US carried out airstrikes against several alleged Hezbollah bases in Iraq and Syria, killing 25 people and injuring over 50. In retaliation to the US airstrikes, militia-backed protesters stormed and damaged the US embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, and were pushed back with tear gas by US troops. After appeals for peace were made that same night by Iraqi government officials, an airstrike carried out by a US drone killed Iranian military leader Qasem Soleimani and 5 others, who the US accused of plotting various attacks on US diplomats and troops. Soleimani, who we'll touch on shortly in the video, was a prominent commander of the Quds Force, which is the unit of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that has long been branded as a terrorist organization by the Trump administration. Since these events transpired, the US has revealed that it plans to deploy some 3,500 troops to the Middle East and has since conducted numerous additional airstrikes on various Iranian-backed militia targets in Iraq. Certain US cities have also tightened up security following the death of Soleimani in a blatant effort to cause hysteria and fear over fabricated threats of retaliation from Iran. Although Donald Trump has proven to be reluctant in sparking up new conflicts in the Middle East, the mounting tension with Iran has clearly placed additional pressure on the boomer president to take a more direct course of action. Realistically speaking, in today's times, it's going to be harder than ever to convince the American people that a war with Iran is necessary, and President Trump's foreign masters, oops, pardon the echo, are well aware that securing the boomer Republican voter base is crucial for maintaining a hostile foreign policy towards Iran. Whilst Trump has stayed largely faithful to his original non-interventionist platform, folding to the pressure of conservative Inc. and going into Iran would mean breaking his core promises and would certainly affect how people see him in 2020. With the impeachment fiasco in process, it may be possible that the conflict with Iran is simply being used as a political diversion from the state of shaky domestic politics, just as the conflict in Iraq was used in the 90s under the Clintons.
We do not seek regime change. However, the Iranian regime's aggression in the region, including the use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors, must end, and it must end now.
Since the tanker ship incident last summer, a large faction of the political establishment around Trump has been foaming at the mouth and eagerly egging on a war with Iran. The warmongering lamestream media, which has been caught time and time again lying about various false threats in the Middle East, has also been there at every step of the way to push the anti-Iranian pro-war agenda. Back in the early 2000s, as many of you will recall, the mainstream media lied about Iraq possessing weapons of mass destruction, leading to a subsequent war which killed 500,000 people and left Iraq to become the jihadi-infested wreck that it is today. As if that wasn't enough, the mainstream media then called for the violent removal of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya a few years later, leading up to the complete destruction of the country under President Obama. Just 2 years back, the media was also caught blatantly lying about Assad's gas attacks in Syria, conveniently just days after Assad had announced that ISIS was largely defeated in the country. Most recently, the mainstream media lied about the true identity of military leader Qasem Soleimani in order to justify his killing and perpetuate further chaos with Iran. As always, the media painted Soleimani as a bloodthirsty anti-American terrorist, but failed to mention that Soleimani once stood alongside American troops and was instrumental in eradicating ISIS in Syria and Iraq, much like the boogeyman Assad. Following Soleimani's death, thousands of Iraqis took to the streets to protest and grieve the loss of the commander, and once again the media flat out lied to demonize Soleimani by stating that Iraqis were out celebrating the death of a militant tyrant. Before you get your panties in a bunch and label me a kebab lover, it's important to realize that the media has always pushed for full-scale wars in the Middle East and that it's currently doing everything in its power to ignite a new conflict with Iran using the same old tactics of deception and hysteria. Whilst most Americans realize that another useless war in the Middle East is going to cost hundreds and thousands of innocent lives and gorillions of taxpayer dollars, the hordes of neocons, Zionists, and Filipino wife-loving boomers have been doing everything in their power to keep US boots on the ground in the Middle East. In fact, every single time that President Trump has announced his plans to withdraw troops from the Middle East, he was instantly attacked by the same Zionists and their war hawks in Washington who are currently beating the war drums for conflict with Iran. Neocon warhawks, including John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, have openly expressed their fixation for regime change in Iran and have clashed numerous times with Trump in the past, in instances where he chose to pursue peace over conflict. By now, many of you have hopefully realized that the pointless wars in the Middle East are in no way beneficial to the American people, and that most of these conflicts are in fact being fought for the sake of our so-called greatest ally in the Middle East, which exerts a tremendous amount of influence on US politicians and US foreign policy. For years now, Zionists and Zio lobbies in the US have aggressively pushed for war with Iran simply because Iran is the last remaining threat to Israel in the region. As general support for wars in the Middle East continues to dwindle in the US, the Zionists who want to eradicate Iran are becoming increasingly desperate to stir chaos with the country, knowing full well that Donald Trump may in fact be their last hope on convincing the hordes of gullible Americans that another pointless war in the Middle East is somehow going to benefit the American people.